There is a particular kind of intimacy woven into a garment that has been tailored exclusively for your body. It ceases to be mere fabric and thread, transforming instead into a second skin, an architectural extension of your own posture. To borrow such a piece requires reverence. To steal it is not just theft, it is an attempt to hijack someone else's silhouette. I learned this the hard way through a midnight blue velvet blazer, a garment I had resurrected from a dusty thrift store bin and spent weeks refining. I took the sleeves up a precise 3/8 of an inch. I unpicked the cheap plastic buttons and replaced them with heavy antiqued brass foxes I found at a flea market. Most importantly, I added my signature. I have a habit of leaving things behind at crowded gatherings, so I always sew a small, unbleached cotton label into the inner left lining of my tailored pieces. Using thick marigold yellow embroidery thread, I stitch my name and the year. It is never perfectly straight. The crookedness is how I know it's mine. The blazer hung in my closet, smelling faintly of cedar and expensive dry cleaning, until a brisk Tuesday evening when my cousin Tamsin appeared at my apartment smelling of sheer panic and sweet vanilla perfume. Tamsin lived her life in a perpetual state of manufactured emergency. This time, the crisis was a corporate mixer for her new marketing firm. She claimed her wardrobe was too casual, too stiff, too everything. She needed something that said effortlessly chic, and her eyes locked onto the midnight blue velvet peeking out from an unzipped garment bag. She begged. She clasped her hands together, vowing upon her life, her firstborn, and her credit score that she would guard the blazer with lethal force. It would be a one-night affair. No red wine, no hors d'oeuvres that crumbled, no stepping outside near smokers. She swore she would drop it off by noon the following day, perfectly pressed. Against my better judgment, swayed by the desperate pitch of her voice, I slipped the blazer off its wooden hanger. Noon the next day arrived and evaporated into the afternoon. My phone remained silent. I sent a casual text at 3 o'clock, a simple inquiry about how the mixer went. Hours later, 3 gray typing dots flickered on my screen before settling into a breezy message. She had completely forgotten. She was so swamped with emails she would swing by before the weekend. I swallowed the slight irritation scratching at the back of my throat and replied with a thumbs up. The weekend came and went. Monday morning brought another text, this time preemptive. She was suddenly out of town for a retreat, the jacket was safe in her closet, and she would absolutely return it next week. By the third week, the tone of our digital correspondence began to curdle. My polite requests for my property were met with escalating annoyance. Tamsin's texts grew clipped. She asked why I was obsessing over a piece of clothing I rarely wore anyway. She told me her schedule was packed and that I was adding unnecessary stress to her plate. The sheer audacity of being reprimanded for wanting my own belongings back left me staring at my phone in disbelief. I was the inconvenience. I was the burden. The final thread snapped on a rainy Thursday afternoon while I was mindlessly scrolling through social media. There, reigning at the top of my feed, was a photo of Tamsin. She was standing in front of a trendy matcha cafe, holding a pale green iced drink, wearing my midnight blue velvet blazer. The brass fox buttons gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. The sleeves hit her wrists exactly where I had measured them for myself. But it was the caption that made the air freeze in my lungs, new autumn staple. Completely obsessed with this vintage find. I opened the comment section. A dozen of her friends were fawning over the fit. One asked where she managed to score such a unique piece. Tamsin had replied to that comment just minutes prior. A tiny vintage boutique downtown, she wrote, appending a little yellow sparkle emoji. One of a kind. I did not immediately react. I sat at my kitchen counter, listening to the rain hit the glass and drafted a text. I kept it neutral, devoid of exclamation points or aggressive punctuation. I attached a screenshot of her post and wrote that I was glad the jacket photographed well, but I really needed it back by Friday. Her response arrived 4 minutes later. Lol, it's literally just a jacket. I typed back, it's my jacket. Then came the pivot, the digital gaslighting. Tamsin sent a voice note, her tone dripping with condescending patience. She explained that midnight blue velvet was incredibly common right now. She suggested that perhaps I was confused, that we just happened to own similar pieces. Furthermore, she claimed she didn't even remember borrowing anything from me recently, and that I was fabricating drama over nothing. She ended the audio clip with a heavy sigh, advising me to drink some water and calm down. I listened to the recording twice. The sheer brazenness of the lie was almost impressive. It was designed to make me question my own grip on reality. For a fleeting second, I actually walked to my closet to check if the blazer was miraculously hanging there. It wasn't. She had stolen it, rebranded it as her own, and decided that denying reality was easier than returning a borrowed favor. I could have driven to her apartment. I could have started a screaming match in her hallway. Instead, I set my phone face down on the counter. I stopped arguing. I retreated into absolute silence. 2 weeks later, the shifting tectonic plates of our family calendar aligned perfectly. Aunt Beatrix was hosting a Sunday afternoon gathering at her sprawling suburban house. It was not a formal holiday, just a casual congregation of aunts, uncles, and cousins drinking strong chicory coffee and passing my older sister's new baby around the living room. The house smelled intensely of cardamom, powdered sugar, and roasted beans. I arrived early, claimed a comfortable armchair in the corner of the living room, and waited. Tamsin walked through the front door 40 minutes late, commanding the attention of the room. And there it was. She had the absolute nerve to wear the blazer to a family function where I was guaranteed to be present. She had paired it with dark denim and a silk camisole, treating it like a shield of invincibility. She believed my 2 weeks of silence meant I had surrendered. She thought I was too polite to cause a scene. I watched her navigate the room, kissing cheeks, cooing at the baby, accepting a porcelain cup of coffee from Aunt Beatrix. The brass fox buttons caught the light from the chandelier. I let her settle. I let her get comfortable. I waited until the conversational lull naturally occurred, that specific moment when the ambient chatter dips and everyone is quietly sipping their drinks. I stood up, smoothing the front of my trousers, and strolled across the Persian rug. I approached Tamsin with a bright, entirely unthreatening smile. I pitched my voice to the exact frequency of genuine admiration, ensuring it carried across the quiet room. Tamsin, that jacket looks incredibly good on you. Where did you end up getting it? I absolutely love the cut. The trap was set. She had a fraction of a second to read my expression, to search for the sarcasm, but I kept my face utterly blank. Aunt Beatrix turned her head, smiling at the compliment. Tamsin relaxed, taking the bait. She assumed I had actually backed down, that I was offering a peace treaty wrapped in a compliment. She offered a practiced, breezy laugh. Right, thank you. I scored it ages ago at this little pop-up market. I just never really wore it until recently. Really? I asked, taking a half-step closer. That's fascinating. Yeah, it's vintage, she said, louder now, playing to the audience of our relatives. No way, I said, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was still perfectly audible. Can I see the inside? I did a rather complicated repair on a velvet blazer just like that recently, and I'm curious if the lining is constructed the same way. Before she could process the request, before she could step back or invent an excuse, I closed the distance between us. I reached out with a light surgical precision. My thumb and forefinger pinched the thick velvet lapel near her collarbone. She stiffened, her coffee cup rattling slightly against its saucer. I smoothly rolled the lapel outward, exposing the burnt orange silk lining of the inner breast panel. There it was. Resting cleanly against the vibrant silk was a small, unbleached cotton square. Stitched into the fabric in crooked, marigold yellow thread was a single word and a number, Sabine 2021. I did not yank the fabric, I did not raise my voice. I held the lapel open just long enough for Aunt Beatrix, who was standing barely 2 feet away, to read the bright yellow embroidery. I released the fabric and took a deliberate step back. I looked Tamsin directly in her eyes, letting the bright, polite smile melt off my face, replaced by a devastating glacial calm. "Oh good," I said, my voice ringing out in the suddenly dead silent room. "It is mine. I am so relieved. You had me thinking I was losing my mind when you said you didn't remember borrowing it." The silence that fell over Aunt Beatrix's living room was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating quiet of a family realizing a boundary had just been publicly executed. No one moved. The clinking of porcelain ceased entirely. Tamsin's face underwent a catastrophic shift in color, draining to a pale chalk before rushing with a hot, violent magenta. She looked down at the floor, then up at the ceiling, letting out a laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping across concrete. "Sabine, stop," she stammered, her voice thin and reedy. "You're embarrassing me in front of everyone. I didn't steal a tailored garment, wear it in front of the owner, and lie about it to the entire room," I replied, my tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "You embarrassed yourself the moment you decided keeping my property was easier than returning it." She stood frozen, the mug trembling in her grip. I didn't wait for an apology I knew wouldn't come. I reached over, took the ceramic mug from her rigid hands, and set it on the nearby mantelpiece. Arms up, I instructed quietly. For a second she looked like she might run. But the collective stare of her mother, her aunt, and her cousins pinned her in place. Defeated, she raised her arms. I gripped the velvet cuffs and slid the blazer off her shoulders. The fabric felt cool and heavy in my hands. I slipped my arms into the sleeves, feeling the immediate, familiar embrace of the tailored fit. I smoothed the lapels, gave Aunt Beatrix a polite nod, and turned toward the kitchen to pour myself a cup of chicory coffee, acting as though claiming stolen goods was just a standard part of Sunday brunch. Tamsin tried to follow me into the hallway, her mouth opening to launch a whispered, venomous counterattack. But Aunt Beatrix stepped directly into her path, crossing her arms over her cardigan. "Why on earth would you lie about something so petty, Tamsin?" Beatrix asked, her voice sharp with disappointment. Tamsin didn't have an answer. She grabbed her purse from the entryway console, shoved her feet into her boots, and walked out the front door, slamming it hard enough to rattle the window panes. An hour later, as I was driving home with my blazer resting safely on the passenger seat, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Tamsin, a sprawling paragraph accusing me of being vindictive, petty, and toxic. She claimed I was a psychopath for orchestrating a public humiliation over a piece of clothing, ending her rant with the accusation that I clearly cared more about material stuff than I did about my own family. I waited until I was parked in my driveway to reply. I typed a single sentence: "I care about basic respect, which you clearly lack." Then I blocked her number. The greatest satisfaction, however, didn't come from the confrontation itself. It came a few days later when a mutual friend mentioned Tamsin's social media. The photo of her drinking matcha in the blazer was still up, but she had turned off the comments. She couldn't spin the narrative anymore. If anyone ever brought up her incredible vintage find in the future, she would have to live with the agonizing knowledge that my name had been quietly resting against her chest the entire time. There is a profound lesson hidden in the seams of this experience. People who lack boundaries will always push yours until they meet absolute resistance. They rely on your politeness. They count on your desire to keep the peace, weaponizing your good manners to get away with minor atrocities. But peace is not the absence of conflict. Sometimes, peace is a crooked yellow stitch, waiting patiently in the dark to prove you were right all along. If you've ever had to take drastic measures to reclaim your own property, or if you have a family member who constantly tests your limits, share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to hit the like button if you enjoyed this little lesson in tailored revenge, and subscribe for more stories where the truth always comes out in the wash.